Now, data from the Ghana Statistical Service shows the country's economy grew 7.2% year-on-year in the third quarter of this year. Will the country sustain the momentum as President-elect takes on the reins of power next year? Richmond Frimpong, Advisory Board Chair at FLF Africa, joins me now for more on this. Hello, Richmond. Thanks a lot for making our time to speak with us today. Now, let's have your take on your reading of the GDP numbers we are seeing for the third quarter of this year. This is one of the most remarkable numbers we are seeing going back to even pre-pandemic levels. Now, your take on the numbers here, the key drivers, and how the country might likely be able to sustain this under this new administration of President-elect John Mahama. Hello, Richmond. Can you activate your video, your audio, please?
Hello, David.
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Clearly. So you can tell from the numbers, it's a good correlation with the fund program and the expected outputs in terms of the GDP growth. If you look at the drivers are largely industry, services, and agriculture. And if you look at the investments that have gone into these three key critical sectors, the outcomes in the fund program at this time is expected. Now, given the peaceful transition that has happened in the past few days, it appears there's going to be a lot more confidence and it's going to see some good attraction. There are red flags, howbeit, and I'm sure I'll be pointing them out as we continue with our conversation.
Yes, and now talking about these red flags, I like the fact that you also highlighted that, because when we take a look at the performance under the former president, who is now the president-elect now, we saw a sustained GDP growth rate of about 7%. This latest number is saying 7.2% growth for the third quarter of this year now. Let's talk about the risks involved, the likely red flags, and when we are looking at the policy reforms, whether or not we can likely continue this. And when the president-elect also mentions that the country will still go back to the IMF to look out for legal room and renegotiate the terms and conditions under this extended credit facility arrangement. For you now, what are the red flags? What are the risks? How much of legal room does Ghana have at this moment to scale the sort of growth we might likely see?
So if you drill deeper into the growth polls, you will see that really even the growth on the industrial sector is coming from mining and quarry. If you go into the services sector, which is second, you will see it coming from ICT and telecoms. And then if you come into agriculture, you see marginal growth trends. And then if you look at the expenditure side, I call something the expenditure drains. And you will see there's gross capital formation. You will see that government is inching up its expenditure and final consumption in this quarter. And then you see some steep decline in net exports. So really, there is still some lot of work to be done. And if the new government tempers so much with the fiscal space the fund program is creating, then there is going to be some turbulence. And so I'm just looking forward to picking up on the core drivers that should be manufacturing instead of just mining and quarry, and then expanding the net of services, not just on telecoms, because the telecoms industry is driven by the major players, which is literally just one singular company, which is external. And then if you pick the services sector, the ICT and telecoms is not the entirety of the services sector. And so these are red flags. And for the steadiness of the growth to continue, the government will have to pay attention not to really destabilize the fund program or to renegotiate much. It is very likely they may look for extension of the program so that we can tame the expenditure side and redirect spends into productive sector. This is the only way to ring fence the growth and to scale up further.
And talking about ring fencing, the sort of growth we would also expect, like you've highlighted, it's also important not to rock the boat way too much, but finding the right balance now at this point in time, just like Nigeria as well, where we're looking towards monetary and then the fiscal complementarity from the fiscal space as well to ensure that we can address the structural lingering challenges. But for you now, I've had quite a long conversation over this 24-hour economy, which the NDC is putting as one of its key mandates with this new administration now. I'd like your take on this now, especially with regards to the 24-hour economy. the challenges when we look at infrastructure, how quickly can this administration ramp up the infrastructure base to support the growth? Looking at manufacturing, for example, it's also looking at logistics. And when we look at how this spreads across the value chain, the services sectors and others, your take on that? And then the big issues around the ownership of future oil and mining projects too. That's also another area that gets the concerns of so many. And the talk has been that possibly the president-elect might just have been painting way too beautiful a picture and it's not really feasible near term. Do you share that sort of sentiment?
Near term, I will say I agree, especially because there is very little space to play with. But I think the government should be strategic and strike a stroke in policy, fiscal policy, that gives some quality in terms of the expense side. And so I've heard the government say it's going to shrink government in terms of the number from about the over 100 and up to about 80 as floor, now to a max of 60. That is good. Immediately, it creates some room and some space. Now, the 24-hour economy, the infrastructure side cannot change much, but policy should be swift. Why? Because there are pockets of the manufacturing sector that can quickly plug in and immediately increase the numbers in terms of employment. And how do they do it? They should look at the existing economic zones. There are just about 5 economic zones. The government controls one through the Free Zone Authority. And so if the 24-hour economy policy is quickly hurried and it is passed from bill to an act, immediately these companies in these zones will take advantage of it, and it will spike the growth in terms of production. It will spike employment and generate some good income that comes into the GDP. So on the 24-hour economy, the infrastructure side may not be able to quicken immediately. But policy-wise, if the government speeds up in terms of passing the policy into an act from a bill proposition through the parliament, then the existing zones, economic zones, industrial parks can take advantage of it, and then they can win in and do the growth polls. But anything outside of that in the immediate term will be extremely difficult to turn around the tides. So government should look at the fiscal and control it very well. And I think there can be some immediate gains.
Exactly. Well, we'll have to leave the conversation here for now. Thanks a lot for your time at the show today. That was Richmond Frimpong, Advisory Board Chair at FLF Africa.